Okay. First of all, thank you so much for you giving us your time and like, can you introduce yourself? What's your position, your organization, please?
My name is Diala Haidar. I am Lebanon campaigner at Amnesty International. Amnesty International is a leading human rights organization. We work on documenting human rights violations and abuses across the world, and we run campaigns and advocacy work to try to stop these violations and make the governments respect human rights.
First, before I start, I would love to thank you. You've done an amazing job on the reports and all the research. I read most of it. It's really, really good job and tackle a lot of problems and the struggles. And I would love to thank you. And when I continue, can you give us an overview the challenge that domestic worker face in Lebanon?
Sure. So Lebanon is home to over 250,000 migrant domestic workers. They come from different African and Asian countries to work in domestic labor. The majority of these workers come from Ethiopia. So we have a large number of domestic workers coming from Ethiopia to work here and make their lives better and the life of their loved ones and their family better. However, when these workers arrive to Lebanon, they are faced by many challenges. Most importantly, these workers are excluded from the labor law protection. So in Lebanon, the labor law excludes domestic labor, even if the worker is Lebanese. There is no protection for a worker if she works in domestic labor. Instead, for migrant workers who come from other countries and work as domestic workers, there are a set of decrees and regulations and customary practices that govern them. And these practices and policies fall under what we call the kafala system. The kafala system is known for the different abuses that the domestic workers are subject to because of it. Because it basically binds the legal residency of the worker to the contractual relationship with the employer. So in case this contractual relationship ends, the residency of the worker will automatically end. And this gives the employer great leverage over and control over the life of domestic worker, and in a way the employer can blackmail the worker to accept abusive and exploitative working conditions in order not to lose her legal residency. As Amnesty, we have conducted 32 in-depth interviews with migrant domestic workers in Lebanon, and we have mapped a pattern of abuse that these workers are subject to. Among these abuses are the long working hours and the lack of break time and days off. So although there is a unified standard contract in Lebanon that was adopted in 2009, however, there are no implementation and enforcement mechanisms. There is no proper monitoring that the employers are actually abiding by the contract. So the contract says that the worker is not supposed to work more than 10 hours a day. However, the vast majority of the workers we interviewed said they were working much more than 12 hours a day. Some of them worked for 19 hours a day. Many workers reported not having time off during the week, although as per the contract, they must have a day off. Many of them said they are not allowed to leave the house. Some of them said they were locked inside the house. I interviewed one worker who said that she was trapped in the house of the employer for 3 consecutive years until she got the chance to escape it when the employer forgot to lock the door. Other abuses were the non-payment of wages. or the late payment of wages, or the salary deductions. For example, according to the ministerial decision, the recruitment agencies are not supposed to deduct the first 3 months' salary of the worker. However, this is still a common practice. The employers pay the 3 months' salary directly to the recruitment agency and not to the worker. And after the 3 months, many workers reported that the employers are not paying them at the end of each month as they are supposed to do, and some of them reported not being paid at all for long months. Another abuse that these workers are subject to is the passport confiscation. So the moment they arrive to Lebanon, even the general security, who are a security apparatus and should abide by the law, many workers documented that the general security take their passports and hand it to the employer the moment they arrive to Lebanon. And the employer would go on confiscating the passport throughout the stay of the worker here. And some of the workers said that this was the employer's way to blackmail the worker and limit her freedom of movement, so that she won't be able to leave the house when she is subject to exploitation and abuse. Another also abuse reported by the workers we interviewed was the restriction on movement and communication. As I mentioned, some of them were locked inside the house. Some of them were not allowed to leave the house without the employer with them. And if they leave the house, they were not allowed to communicate with other fellow workers. So if an Ethiopian sees another Ethiopian in the street, some employers do not allow them even to wave to them. Also, there is restriction on the communication. Although, as per the contract, the employer is supposed to allow the worker contact her family, and he or she are supposed to pay for one phone call, one international phone call each month. Many workers said that this was not available to them. Another abuse was food deprivation. Unfortunately, many workers reported that the employers would not allow them eat adequately, or they would lock the fridge and not allow them to open them and eat when they feel hungry. Another abuse was the inadequate accommodation and the lack of privacy that many workers reported on. For example, when they come to Lebanon, they would assume that they will have their own rooms. Unfortunately, many of them said that they were forced to either sleep on the floor of the kitchen or in the living room, on a sofa in a living room, or some of them even report being forced to sleep in the on the balcony. So this, of course, means that the worker does not have any kind of privacy. The employer or any member of the family can enter the kitchen or the living room or the balcony whenever the worker is there, you know. Also, many workers reported on being verbally abused. When we say verbally abused, it means talking to the worker in a humiliating and degrading manner, calling her names like donkey and many other humiliating and unacceptable words. Another kind of abuse is the physical abuse. Many workers reported being subject to different kinds of physical abuse when they challenge their employers, particularly. And only few workers, actually only one worker reported on sexual abuse, but that doesn't mean that sexual abuse is not happening. But you know the cultural taboo around sexual abuse, and many workers wouldn't feel comfortable talking about this kind of abuse. So it is generally reported, but we know that it is happening. There is also, of course, restrictions on their access to health. Although the contract stipulates that the employer has to buy the worker an insurance and has to make sure that the worker has proper health care whenever she needs. Many workers said that they didn't get the proper health care when they needed it. And when they reported on having pain or any kind of health problem, they were advised by their employer to take painkillers. And they were not allowed a visit to the doctor or physician. All of this, of course, has an impact on the mental health of the worker. Many of the workers that we interviewed said that all these abuses and all this ill treatment and all this violence that they were subject to has pushed them to either attempt suicide or has made them have suicidal thoughts. I interviewed one worker who tried to commit suicide 3 different times because she was locked in her employer's house for 1 year. She was deprived from food. She was physically abused. All her papers and her passport were confiscated by the employer. She had to work long hours without breaks, without a day off. This had a high psychological toll on her and made her attempt suicide on 3 different occasions, unfortunately. However, she survived it and she's a very strong woman, and now she is very active on migrant domestic workers' rights in Lebanon. Of course, there are other extreme abuses that the workers are subject to in Lebanon. All these abuses that I mentioned can amount to forced labor and human trafficking. And we have documented also cases of human trafficking by the recruitment agencies and by the employers themselves. Um, uh, and of course, there are many barriers to justice. So if a worker is subject to one of these abuses that I've mentioned, if she decides to leave her employer's house and go report these abuses to the police, she will risk losing her residency. That's the major problem with kafala system. So if she leaves the employer house, the employer can call the security agencies and report her as absconding or a runaway. Although none of us, if any of us leave their work, the employer won't call us a runaway. But a migrant domestic worker is called a runaway when she decides to leave her job because of abusive employers. So if he reports her to the authorities, she will lose her residency. And once she goes to report the employer, she will be the one detained and not the employer, because she's the one lacking the valid residency. And this is the main problem with the kafala system.
So, do you think even the Lebanese government bringing the domestic worker under the protection of labor law, still the government will enforce the law?
This is what we are trying to push for. So after we launched the report, we also launched a campaign along with the report, and we had very clear recommendations to the Ministry of Labor. So in addition to actually amending the law and extending labor protections to migrant domestic workers, we are asking for enforcement mechanisms as well. The government has to monitor how the recruitment agencies are actually treating the workers, if they are respecting their rights, if they are fulfilling their obligations towards these workers. And one of the recommendations that Amnesty is pushing for is actually establishing a complaint mechanism, a specific complaint mechanism and a complaint unit at the Ministry of Labor, just to receive complaints from migrant domestic workers about the different abuses that they may subject to in Lebanon. Another recommendation that we are calling for is the activation of the hotline. So there was a hotline established in 2015 at the Ministry of Labor for migrant domestic workers to contact whenever they are subject to any kind of abuse or a contract breach. However, the hotline is not activated. And after we issued the report and launched the campaign, he extended an invitation to Amnesty to sit on a task force to give the ministry recommendations in regards to improving the contract and other recommendations that can better protect the migrant domestic workers in Lebanon. And we are now in the last stage before we submit these recommendations to the ministry, and we need every single push possible from the civil society in Lebanon, but also from Ethiopians, to help us push this cause forward. We have issued a petition as Amnesty, and we are collecting signatures on this petition to ask for abolishing kafala and protecting migrant domestic workers. So we are hoping that the Ethiopians also can help us collect as many signatures as possible, so we can hand the Minister of Labor this petition and show him that there is thousands of people who are against this abusive and exploitative system and are calling for protecting migrant domestic workers in Lebanon.
Okay, we will, yes, that's really important, and we will, I will share the link, and so we will post and we will share for every page we know, and who can, gather this petition to sign and to be helpful. It's our responsibility. So one thing is really a big problem. I see a big problem in Lebanon. There is certain area the government itself has no control. So do you think in those area there will be any control? Those people, like, even I'm speaking based on the evidence. We complain against Sue, the employer. They are not even showing up in the court. They are not even coming to interview in the police station. They are not respected any laws and anyone. Do you think those area also they will the government? Do you think the government will force the law in this area also?
So we are building on this momentum to actually push the government not only to try to dismantle the kafala system on paper, but in practice to enforce the laws and to hold to account every abusive employer or recruiter. And we can't lose hope that things can change. But not only laws can make the difference. There is unfortunately a lot of racism in Lebanon against migrants in general and migrant domestic workers. So we have to work also on a societal level, on the society and the awareness of the society. So it's a lot of work and it takes time, but change will happen eventually. So we can't lose hope. We have to keep pushing. And I'm sure, Banshi, you know a lot of women, and you've met a lot of migrant domestic workers, and you had the chance to work with them. We have incredibly strong women in Lebanon, incredibly strong Ethiopian women who have been facing a lot of challenges and who have worked for abusive and horrendous employers. But I mean, these women are an inspiration for us because they are still fighters for their rights, and they are mobilizing their communities. They are community leaders. They are giving us hope that we can change the situation. And this is really important because the community itself is mobilizing for its rights, and not only the Lebanese. So it is through this partnership between the different communities, the Ethiopian, the Bangladeshi, the Sri Lankan, and the Lebanese, that we can actually bring about the change.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Also, you're doing a great job working and opening the door to work with us. It's really a lot for us. And I read an article in 2017. It says like 2 domestic workers die per week. So, but those days, like in April, I know of like around 5 Ethiopian died in between like 19 and like Monday to Monday. So, do you have, is Amnesty done any investigation on those days, right?
So we have requested this information from the internal security forces because they are the official authority that is mandated with monitoring these cases and documenting them. Uh, Unfortunately, however, the internal security forces did not provide us with these numbers. So we don't have official numbers on the number on how many suicides are happening each year in Lebanon. But we know that in April alone, we have 4 different cases of migrant domestic workers committing suicide in Lebanon. I think there needs to be more transparency from the officials on the number of suicides, and there needs to be serious investigations on the reasons behind these workers committing these suicides. And employers should be held to account. Yani it can't go on that these suicides are still happening on a monthly basis, if not a weekly basis, and no employers are held to account. Why are these workers dying at this rate? What is happening? Are these accidents? Are these suicides? Are these caused by abusive working conditions? What is happening? We need to know. Of course, we have our own assumptions to what's happening, but we need serious investigations and we need justice for these workers. We need to hold employers to account so that no more workers can reach this dark moment in their life where they see no other option but throwing themselves out of the balconies.
Yeah, you mentioned from the beginning, and you've been documented or interviewed the woman who's been abused, also tried to commit suicide and survive. Also, I interviewed a couple of women who has been survived and also tried to commit suicide. As you know, I was a domestic worker and I am the insider. I know how it feels and how the treatment inside the house. It's clear there is abuse, but one things I don't understand why the Ministry of Labor claim this is its mental ill or in reports. Let's say, have you like did you get any chance to read all the reports? Because most of them they claim it's they have mental problem, or when they clean, they flip and they fall from the apartment. That's the claim and on the reports. So, did you get any chance to read any report from the dead domestic worker?
Well, what I can talk about is the stories of the migrant domestic workers that we interviewed at Amnesty. And these workers reported on extremely abusive and exploitative working conditions. And it was these conditions that drove them to think about suicide or attempt a suicide. It was not having, you know, a personal mental health issue. It was because of the exploitation and because of the entrapment that they felt. I mean, having a worker trapped for 3 years in a house, not able to leave it, or even a month. I mean, I would invite anyone to think of himself or herself trapped in a house or a room for only 1 week and not allowed to have proper food, not, I mean, stripped of his or her human dignity, humiliated with words, physically abused. What would this person feel? What impact would that have on their mental health? So these were the stories these were the testimonies of the workers that we interviewed. They said that these exploitative working conditions were the main cause for them to think about suicide or to attempt suicide.
Do you think any change will come in Lebanon?
Yes, of course. Change will always happen, but we will have to keep rocking the boat. We will have to keep pushing for the rights of migrant domestic workers, and we will have to support this cause. We need every single one listening to this interview to sign the petition to help us amplify the voices of migrant domestic workers in Lebanon and Ethiopian domestic workers. They have been campaigning for years for their rights. We need your help to amplify their voice. So sign the petition and help us end the kafala system.
Thank you so much, Diala. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.